We were friends all 4 years of high school because we did theater together. We had the common bond, and it just genuinely felt like a family. And when you have that sort of bond with people, it doesn't really matter what sort of barriers or differences you have between each other, because they did come up. You would find those differences. You'd be like, oh, you experience that and I don't experience that. But then because you have that bond, you find a way to overcome it. Ideally, for the rest of my life, I would love to always be having new experiences, meeting new people, hearing different stories, because there's no such thing as a person with an uninteresting life. Everyone has something valuable to contribute, an interesting story. There's a lot more than my worldview, than my perspective, and I can't see it all. I can't do everything. And so I look forward to hearing from and talking with and learning from other people, because I want to hear it. I want to hear their perspectives. I do hear sometimes from my friends and acquaintances who are, Black and brown, is they do talk a lot of times about I think microaggressions are definitely one of the more common things. And that's something that I empathize and I understand, because as a trans person, you experience microaggressions all the time too, but it's different. And so I realize you can't equate sexuality, gender sexuality with race, because in America, race is a really visceral thing. But it's, it's different but the same, and I try and empathize with them, and the fact of yeah, man, that sucks. Just letting them vent to me, get out their frustrations, because I hear it. I really do. One of the things that I've been hearing in the theater community is there aren't always a ton of roles or places for actors and technicians and stuff, possibly as they age. Just because, it's not necessarily a young man's game or anything like that, but quite frankly, there aren't a whole bunch of scripts written where there's a leading lady over the age of 50. I'm really good at reading body language sometimes, but I can get that wrong. It's so much easier for me to sit down with someone and say hey, we seem to be missing the mark somewhere. Let's talk about expectations that you're having or thoughts and ideas that you're having, and then I'll talk about what I'm doing and what I'm having. Because that's, I attribute that also to being a Virgo. Just because I don't like playing games. I don't like playing guessing games. I would so much rather, because I feel like that's what a lot of people in modern media, social media makes that so easy to play games, to subtweet, and I don't like it. I don't like playing guessing games. I just want you to tell me. And I would be very happy to tell you.
I wish it would get to a point though where we're not bringing in more Latinas or Mexicans or Hispanics because it's a Hispanic show. I wish we would just start casting people of all races into various roles without the race needing to be the reason to have them there. He knew that I had been working with NCL for a while, so he kind of took that into account, saying, I know that you know what you're doing. You've done this before, you're seasoned on ships. And he said, I would like this, but he basically asked me a lot of questions about how the things run. He took in my advice and opinions of, I think that this would work better because of this, I think. And he was just so wonderful. He just took all that information in, and a lot of times he said, you know what, you just do what you think works best for the show and what you need. And you don't often get that. I feel like discomfort is part of growing. Mm-hmm. And that discomfort disrupting somebody's calmness of thinking that they knew what they were talking about, or thinking that their place of thought was from a lighthearted point of view. If somebody says something, for instance, if somebody says something racist and they don't realize it's a microaggression, mm-hmm. and you call them out, their immediate reaction is why okay, calm down. I didn't mean it like that. And I'm like, no, I'm trying to tell you that it might mean nothing to you, but it means something heavy to somebody else. I'm going to say that everyone else is going to keep on pushing. You won't be the only person. You won't be the only person who will speak out when you see something inappropriate, when you see somebody else getting talked to in in microaggressions or being treated unfairly or anything like that.
Well, I think representation means everything. So I think just my sheer presence gives my students of color confidence that they can achieve what it is that they hope to achieve in life. And so I think that it just my sheer presence being there gives them um, hope. But in terms of like me, in terms of what I try to give to them, I think that I share with them my story. I share with them my vulnerabilities, and and we share collectively. And now I kind of feel as though I've earned my space to be here. I don't feel that need I don't feel those insecurities anymore. But I do feel that I always question why things are given to me. And I don't know that that feeling will ever go away. So I think that for me, I oftentimes meet with my students quite frequently just to have real dialogue about race. In our curriculum, I try to create curricula that is designed to be inclusive of Black people because my desire is that my students of color see themselves within our curriculum. So it automatically gives them a sense of inclusion within who we are as a program and who we are within the discipline of dance and what our values are, so that they can instantly feel that they're valuable and they're included and they belong within dance, in a way that I didn't feel as a Black dancer looking in at ballet, I'm not seeing myself in that picture and then going, okay, that's a space I don't belong in. But with all of that, I am very optimistic about the direction that we're going. And as I was saying, I was criticizing like some of the non-traditional casting. That's a baby step forward, and I think that we have to celebrate the steps forward and lament on the steps backwards. And so I think that as we move forward, we are acknowledging that those steps are happening, and we can just be correcting as we go. I'm not one of those people where, even though I grew up in the South, and Southern hospitality and gentility is something that's kind of like nurtured within you and ingrained within you. But over the years, I've just learned to be more outspoken about things that I don't like and things that I see that are injustices in the world. When I say that when I eat something and I don't like it, I share that. Some people, depending on, if you're in a situation where you feel like, oh, this person made it, and how dare you, say that you don't like it. And for me, it's kind of symbolic of just because people don't like the things that you have to say does not mean you don't say it.
I think, yes, I have a huge diverse circle of friends. And I did that. I mean, I was very aware when I was building relationships and stuff, because the last thing I wanted to do was to have my circle of friends be all disabled people.
Mm.
Because that puts you in a little community that keeps you stuck there. And a lot of my disabled friends don't understand that. They're like, well, why don't you come and do this disabled thing or go cycling with us? And it's like, you know what? That's not my thing. And you can do that. That's fine. I have no problem with it. But everything is centered around the disability. And I am so much more than my disability. It's more in a platform of somebody who's asking me to come and speak about disability or about dance, and how the two are integrated is the part that I find just really fascinating to teach people about. Is because if you have a heartbeat, you're already a dancer, because dance begins with the heart, with a beat.
Wow.
And it's the dancer's inside of you. You just have to reach in and find it. I think the best way to answer that question is, one, to get directors and producers to actually look at you as talent instead of the disability first.
Mm.
You know, my thing has always been, see the person first.
Mhm.
We are people before we are wheelchairs and crutches and canes and braces and whatever else. We are people first. How that person relates with their difference and how they go through the world, through their life with that difference, not in spite of, but with that difference. And that's one thing that used to always bug me is, you know, you've done so much in spite of your disability. It's like, it's not in spite of. I don't want to lose my disability so I have all this extra freedom. I want to have the freedom with my disability.
Many, many years ago, and I started to realize that that was a really dangerous premise for me to try to figure out what was inside of somebody else's head. And I thought, one, I have no business there. Two, if I get it wrong, I could hurt myself, I could hurt them, I could hurt a community. So it's better to ask. And even when somebody tells you, doesn't mean it's true, right? They could be saying things because they're scared, they're jealous, they don't like you, and they're lying to your face. So, you know, I think it takes a long time to really know people, to know their heart, to know their mind. We may get impressions, but you never know when you meet somebody where they just came from, what they just ate, who they just spoke with, what they just read. So for me, I laugh at myself when I'm in that place where I'm like, oh my gosh, they didn't like me, or they must really love me, and then give me 2 minutes and I go right back to, and I really don't know. What was my experience? How did I feel? If we're not authentic, if we're not vulnerable, I mean, all we have is our truth to tell. And to express what they feel and then to be able to learn. I think our knee-jerk reaction is defensiveness. One of the things to keep in mind is that many people who've been subject to some form of oppression, whether it's based on sexual orientation, disability, ability, race, ethnicity, cultural differences, the ability to feel safe to speak up, right? How you might language is different than how others might language. And most people haven't had the opportunity to express how they feel before everybody wants to start talking about process. And so if you jump right into process, you have to be aware that that process can trigger feelings.
I'm so interested in people who aren't like me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I seek out people who aren't like me, who don't look like me, who don't identify as I am, whose sexuality is different, whose lifestyle is different,
Mm-hmm.
whose culture is different, whose language is different, with enough BIPOC that I don't have to have the token. I have been lucky enough with specifically with my circus background to find people who are genderqueer and who are trans and who are who have lifestyles and sexualities that are outside of mine. I have friends who have educated me and held my hand through my faults as I learned to be a better human. And I have the people who, when something goes wrong, I can turn to and say, is this okay? Is this what happened here? And I can learn from it. You know, a really good example is, or not a good example, but an example. I grew up on a farm. I grew up on a ranch. Most of our ranch hands were illegal immigrants from Mexico. My partner currently is a Mexican American, and he's been wonderful to point out, not just with what my family says, but especially when we first started dating, some of the residual comments that lived in my world. The most obvious one just being, you know, Mexicans are hard workers. I always thought that was a compliment and never understood the layers behind it.
Right.
And having comments like that pointed out to you, having comments like that are incredibly uncomfortable. It's not comfortable. It's not, you know, the spa day bed in the Bahamas. It's not that. But the thing is if someone is feeling comfortable enough to tell you something you're doing, it's because they want to invest in you being a better person. You know, we're not alone. We as women aren't alone. You know, BIPOC are not alone. Transgender, they're not alone. These experiences they're not alone, but because of how successful white supremacy has been, it has made us feel alone. You know, it has made people feel alone in their community so that they don't speak out.
Right.
Because when you speak out, everyone sees it, and we start this whole wave. But it takes people speaking out. And I learned that early, because I would come back to theaters where they were, oh, well, the last woman had no problem with that. She had no problem with that. No, she probably did. But she didn't say anything. So I learned that early, that if I speak up, I'm not speaking for me. I'm speaking for myself and everyone like me on the line. And I'm speaking for myself, for everyone who's coming behind me.
You speak loudest with action. And if people know that I'm gay, know that I'm Hispanic, they don't think about that. They think they look at my work and what I've done. And that speaks volumes. I don't need to say anything else. I don't need to prove anything to anybody. Because I've done it. I've done a lot of work. I've been in the theater for about 47 years, and making my living in the theater. And I'm proud of what I've done. I'm proud of the relationships I've built. Proud of the theater that I'm working in now. And it speaks for itself. Life can be fearful, and there's a lot to be afraid of, but you can't let it, you can have the fear, you just can't let it stop you. You have to go and do it anyway. And so I learned early on just to say yes. When things were presented to me, I just said yes and took it. This job that I'm in right now, I had no clue how to run a theater. And it was offered to me, and I said yes. Going to New York City in the first place, some friends of mine said, we're going to New York, do you want to go? Yes.
As the theater community, and I've noticed an improvement, but being more open to those conversations as a whole. Luckily the theater community, from my experience at least, has been pretty open. But also, with that, I know from my own experience growing up, for the whole LGBT community, of making more art and theater that is about the LGBT community and our experience. The more I'm open about it, the more people get to know, because being trans is one of those things that is not as easy to spot all the time. And people don't always realize someone's trans unless they open up about it. Because as you mentioned, you might have not have known initially, but, being open about it, people are like, oh. Because there are those negative, stereotypes out there, and if they, that people might have. So I just figured being open about it is more helpful, because they're like, oh, you're actually not that bad of a human being. Try to speak my truth to help promote the speaking of other people's truths, to help get to a place where that is not something we're doing.
Color conscious casting as opposed to color blind casting. And I have since changed my definition of color conscious casting to identity conscious casting, because it's not just when you cast someone, and I felt this way in casting some of like my own things. It's not just race. It's not just, like what you look on the outside. It's your entire identity, whether it's sexual orientation or your gender identity, or it's who you are as a person that you need to take into consideration when you're casting a project. If it were to come down to identity conscious casting, I think making sure, one, that they are the correct person of color, regardless if it was Miss Saigon or not, and then taking into account what they bring to the table. Because at the end of the day, I think the perfect world, and what I think identity conscious casting is aiming toward, is seeing what they bring to the table and if what they brought was what we're looking for. What it means for me being in the arts is to break that cycle. And I really hope that I can serve as some form of inspiration for like that little 7-year-old girl that's like watching right now, and they're like, oh, well, she looks like me and she's like there, so why can't I do it too? I want a new wave of young artists to come from the old, and I hope that I'm also involved in that wave, but to change the world, because the world sees the world through art. And we hold, as we say, a mirror up to it. So I really hope, I use this analogy a lot because of like how whitewashed the media tends to be, that what they don't realize, by they I mean those in power, when they say things like, but I'm not Asian, or I'm not, like insert marginalized group here, how am I supposed to connect with what you're saying? But what they don't see is that we've always seen ourselves through that mirror. But because we're never in the foreground, it's a smudged mirror, and we're in the background seeing a stereotype of ourselves given back to us. But what I want to do is clean that mirror and make it new, and have space for all of us to be in that mirror.